Forward to hosting you today for a very interesting topic. Our session today, the title of the topic is Regenerative Design, Buildings and Landscapes that Give More Than They Take. And it's our hope that it would be an opportunity to break down the topic of regenerative design, to learn about the basics of, and almost have like an introduction to the topic. We have three interesting speakers with us today. Our first speaker is David Cheshire, who's joining us from the UK. We also have Nico Tillie there as well, as in digitally. And our third speaker is Rebecca Khamala, who is sitting in our audience here. So we have two speakers that will present online and one speaker who will present in person from the Localtalks office in Uganda and Kampala. I think we have a very short introduction today. I would like to go quite quickly into the presentations. The first speaker will be David, then Nico, and we will conclude with Rebecca. I have very short introductions about each speaker before they speak, just to let you know a little bit about them. But I think, yes, I think everyone else could. Yeah, I think David, you could share your screen as you're ready, and then we'll give a very short introduction. So David Cheshire is a director at AECOM. He specializes in sustainability and regenerative design in the built environment. He is the author of Building Revolutions, the handbook to Building a Circular Economy, and a newly published book titled Regenerative by Design, that explains how buildings can have a positive impact on the planet, becoming an active part of the ecosystem. We're very interested to hear what he has to say. I'll hand over straight to David.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. Yeah, it's really nice to be here, and thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about what the research I've been doing over the last couple of years, and what I found out talking to lots of designers about regenerative design and what that all means from a different perspective. And I think there's a few really interesting things that I found anyway that I've learned and that I'd like to share with you. So, I mean, I think to start with, I think what's really interesting to see this is a view out of my office in London, and it's very evident from that and lots of cities around the world that we don't really have any room for nature in lots of our cities, and it's here it's really pretty much all concrete and tarmac with little else there. I think there's a couple of trees down the bottom there, and that's it. And I think that's really really important for really a problem for two things. One, that means that all the natural systems and things that should be happening aren't happening in our cities because there just isn't the space for them. And also it means that we're often, people who live particularly in cities are very disconnected from nature and natural systems, which is really important because it means that we forget quite often that we are actually completely dependent on all those beautiful natural systems that are giving us the fresh air that we breathe and the 21% oxygen that we need to live, basically. And without a proper functioning natural systems, then we will all be dead straight away. So I've got a noise kicking through somewhere. I'm not sure, someone's turning over pages or something. I don't know. If they could mute, thank you very much. And then, we have been very clever. A lot of the cities that we built are actually accommodating a huge amount of people in a very small space. So it's actually not just the cities that are the problem as much as is the huge shadow that our cities cast on the rest of the planet. And that's multiple things, but the sorts of things that we take for granted in many of the developments that we have about having fresh water to our buildings, electricity, fresh food being grown, and of course all the materials and resources that we need to build our buildings and our cities, and all of that is a huge amount of land use, resources, infrastructure, and things like food. It's transport as well. Lots of places. I mean, in the UK, for example, we're we're dependent on lots of food being grown in southern Spain, in polytunnels. That there's a whole basic city-sized area of polytunnels where we're growing food that is then shipped over or flown over, in the case of some of the food, to the UK. And actually, what this has done, all of this activity, all of this resource use and everything, has kicked us well over the safe limits, the safe operating space that you can see there in the center of this image for the planet. And we've already transgressed, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of those limits, including biochemical flows, which are nitrates and phosphates and all those chemicals, and then things like novel entities include things like microplastics, which are being found all over the world now. So even in the most pristine environments, we're finding microplastics, and they're contaminating everything and getting into our own bloodstream and everything as well. So the whole idea of this regenerative design, I think, is quite nicely summarized in this diagram, showing the idea that we've been, certainly what I've been doing for the last 30 years is looking at trying to make buildings a bit greener and a bit more sustainable and a bit better than they were. But actually what we've been doing is really just making them a bit less bad. So we've been using a bit less energy, a bit less water, generating a bit less waste. And I think where we're at now is that really hasn't worked. It's not nearly enough, and that we're in this double crisis of biodiversity and climate crisis now that is just really destroying the way that we normally live and work. And actually what we need is to completely change what we're doing and start to move towards a more restorative and regenerative approach, where we're saying that our built environment, our infrastructure and our buildings has to be actually becoming an active part of the ecosystem and actually adding to ecosystem rather than always taking away from it. So I've built up a little diagram, which I'll build up, which was trying to summarize what I found, and also it helps structure the book and what I was talking about, and coming up with some design principles. And it starts with this idea that most of the projects that I work on, certainly, and a lot of designers I know, focus on the site. And the red line boundary of the site is really the limit of their thinking. But of course, our buildings are sitting within a locality, they're sitting in with a city or within a region. Ultimately, they're all nested within the ecosystem, which is actually, as I said before, is our life support system. That's what keeps us able to breathe and eat and drink, and that's essential services that it provides. And ultimately, we're bound by the planetary limits. We've only got one planet, and as that diagram showed earlier, we're transgressing many of those planetary limits already. So we need to try and work our way to getting back within those limits. So we need to be thinking beyond that red line boundary to be thinking about all of those things as we've just spoken about. And then superimposed onto that, I've then put some design principles, and the idea then is that they work at all of these levels. And I'll go through these now, or some of them anyway. I don't have time for all of them, but I think one of the sort of couple of things I found that were really insightful that came out of the research I did was that getting to understand the site that we're going to be building on or looking at before it was ever built on before. So what was it like when it was a greenfield or an untouched site, and then using that as our baseline to say, can we get back to that with when we've built and developed that site? Can we get it back to that level before that we had before? And that means actually providing ecosystems services, which I'll talk about now. So providing these ecosystem services, it's very interesting because it's something that in AECOM, the infrastructure, my infrastructure colleagues talk about a lot when they're working with people that provide water services and electricity and everything like that in the UK, for example. We have a team who look at calculating ecosystem services. and it's not a term that comes up in the built environment at all in the past, but I think it's something we are going to have to start to get the hang of. So ecosystem services are basically, these are examples of the things that the ecosystem does for us. As I said earlier, it provides us with oxygen, but it also regulates those biochemical flows. It's all of those things you might have learned about, at school or whatever, about, nitrogen cycles and oxygen cycles and all those sorts of things. But it also retains and holds those nutrients in the soil, in the biomass, and regulates those. And we're busy messing with those cycles at the moment and disrupting them. And it also does things like, obviously, climate regulation. So it keeps our climate at a level, or has kept our climate at a level which is able to support our civilization, and does these other sorts of things that it's talking about here, as well as the obvious things like habitat provision. And there's an excellent author called Maybright Pedersen Zari, who I'd recommend if you haven't seen, where I got a lot of these ideas from. And just an example, I mean, this is a pretty it's an amazing project, but obviously it's pretty out there in terms of its look, and its budget, I imagine, was massive. But I just thought it was a very interesting project. So this is the Google HQ in San Francisco Bay, designed by Heatherwick Studios. And what they've done here is why I picked on this and thought it was interesting is because they spent a lot of time looking at the ecosystem around the site. And they worked with that, and they've recreated it through engineered wetlands. So this whole bay area is salt marsh, so it's protected salt marsh environment. And one of the things that they were required to do was not allow any of the runoff, the fresh rainwater running off the roofs and the hard standing from these buildings, was not allowed to go to the salt marsh, because it would dilute the briny water and mean that it was damaging that ecosystem. So what they've done is they have to retain, and they have retained, all of the water, runoff water, on the site. So you can see this pond here, and there's a retention pond here, and they're also doing lots of by building this engineered wetland that recreates the natural wetland, they're doing climate regulation, purification of air and water, and they're doing lots of and nutrient cycling. So they're doing lots of the things that were in that earlier slide as part of the development. And they're also doing some other clever things, like which, for example, this roof, the whole of the roof is a photovoltaic array, basically. So each of these panels is a photovoltaic cell. So they're generating around 40% of their energy needs through that alone. And that really takes us on really to the next design principle, which I think is another important one, which is thinking about what are the environmental limits that we're designing within, and setting ourselves budgets that depend on what's available on the site. So what resources are available on the site in terms of the sun, in terms of what heat can we get out of the ground, for example, what water is falling on the roof as rainfall that we can capture and use. And then what a lot of the designs I spoke to, and I think is what sounds like the local works are doing as well, which looks really amazing, some of your projects, is to say, well, that's the budget. That the only amount of energy we can use in a year is the amount that we can capture as through photovoltaic cells, for example, and the only amount of water that we can use is what is falling from the sky across a year. And this project in Portland, in northwest of the States, have done just that. So they've got a whole roof of photovoltaics, and then there's a school up the road that they've added some panels to as well, and paid for that. And those two elements they've used that as the limit for the energy use they're using in the building, and then they've designed it very efficiently so it doesn't use any more energy than that. And they've done the same with the water, and the water is it's a pretty high tech approach they've taken to water, but it's also pretty impressive. So they've got a rainwater collection and cleaning scheme. They've got a grey water system that takes all the water from showers and washhand basins and use that. They clean that up and use that to flush the toilets. They've also got very efficient flushing toilets that use a vacuum flush system, and then they're actually composting the black water and the solids basically the solids are composted in these big composting bins on the ground floor plant room, and then those are filled up, and over time they are the waste is composted to a point where it just needs a little bit of further treatment, and then it can be used as fertilizer. And also really clever is that actually they're reclaiming the nitrates and the phosphorus from the wastewater, and they've got a revenue stream of about, I think they said $50,000 a year of by selling that the phosphates and the nitrates as fertilizer that they're then using in they can then use as fertilizer, which gives them some money back. And I thought that was really interesting, looking at it from a more holistic perspective and saying, you know, that we can do some of the clever systems thinking and the wider perspective thinking, even in a fairly high tech solution. And what that means is that we're not having to mine for phosphates, and we're not having to suck nitrogen out of the air and fix it and turn that into fertilizer. And then what's happening in the UK a lot is that we're at the moment we're taking a lot of those fertilizers and spreading them on the land in way too high quantities, which is then leaching into our rivers and our streams and damaging those ecosystems, combined with dumping raw sewage into our rivers as well, which isn't very helpful. And we're getting eutrophication, and the rivers are all dying. So this would be, you know, a much better solution where we're actually capturing things out of our buildings that are useful nitrogens and dealing with a couple of problems in one go. And then I've got lots of other projects in there. I haven't got time to go through them all, but just to briefly mention, there's some work that our colleagues in China are doing around developing sponge cities, as it's called, which is this idea of making buildings, making cities less or more permeable and less impermeable, I suppose, so that they can absorb flood water, and it cleans up the water as well, and uses natural systems to do that. I'll pick up the Green School South Africa in a second. There's the Benin National Assembly building in Benin, which Kere Architecture worked on with our structures team, which is trying to copy the function of trees, and the tree that people sit under in a lot of the villages to convene meetings, and they copy some of those ideas about creating that shading effect, and it also is quite permeable, so it allows air through to provide some ventilation, and some other clever ideas which are drawing on these ideas around biomimicry. And then the last one in the bottom right-hand corner there is around urban agriculture, and this idea of moving away from having a lot of the food for our cities grown somewhere else and casting a large shadow, and actually saying, why don't we grow at least some of the fresh things that we need in the built environment? And this is an entirely integrated greenhouse that's integrated into the roof or the top floor of the building, which also exchanges the heating and cooling and things with that building. So just a mention of the Green School South Africa, which I thought that was really interesting. They're using lots of things. They used some elements of rammed earth, salvaged a lot of doors and other elements from other projects, other buildings that were being deconstructed. They've got reed and mud ceilings and lime plaster and all sorts of clever things they went for. And it's very much this idea of what's available locally. And I think that's a lot about not just the circular economy, but about the regenerative design approach of saying, what can we use that we can use that's available to us, rather than having to draw on a sort of international architecture and having to go around the world to find all those raw materials. And then I thought just a second to last thing was just to mention is I thought was really interesting is if we want to go high tech, then there's something called microbial fuel cells, which I learned a little bit about, which was this idea of taking. There's a little diagram of it here actually, but the idea is you take the urine, and this has been tested out at a festival, as you can see. you take the urine and it goes into a microbial fuel cell, and there's all these microbes in there, and they basically it becomes their food. So they eat the nutrients in there, and as a byproduct, it also generates a little bit of electricity. So you get two things in one go. You get your wastewater cleaned up to a point where it's actually good enough to be able to put back into watercourses, and it also generates some renewable energy on the basis of that. And this has actually been trialed at Sesame Girls School in Kisuru in Uganda, where this has been put into the toilets, the outside toilets, and it basically cleans up the wastewater to a point where it can go back into the river, and it's also generating enough energy. It doesn't create a huge amount, but it's enough electricity is generated to light the toilets at night. So that's pretty much it. Lots of other case studies, but one that I think brings together lots of these ideas I'll just finish with, which is Schoonskip in apologies for my pronunciation, I always get that wrong, but which is in Amsterdam. And this was really driven by a local community that said they wanted to build their own homes, they wanted to build a floating community. And there's sort of two drivers for that, really. One was that climate change and rising sea levels are very much front of mind in residents in Amsterdam, and secondly, because the land values and the the lack of land availability meant that they said, look, we think this is a really interesting opportunity to build a community on the water. And they've got this smart tech here that actually means that this sort of pontoon links all the buildings together. It generates more energy than it needs across the year. There's a microgrid that generates exchanges the energy between the different residences. Some generate more than they need, and it's been sent around between them. And they had to set up whole mechanisms to make that sort of thing work. And they've added in lots of they capture lots of water, and they recycle lots of water and things. They take the heat out of the water in the form of water source heat pumps, and they've also generated habitat for wading birds and things in around the building. So they're doing lots and lots of things, and lots of other things there that they're doing, which I thought were really interesting. But I think I'm out of time, so that's it. That's my book with loads of case studies and stuff in. Hopefully it's given you a little idea, and that's it. Thank you for your attention. Are you still there? It's gone very quiet.
Hello, thank you for your presentation.
No
Yes, I've just shifted to another screen so that I can share the next presentation. But thank you. I think we will hold Q&A till the end. So I'm sure there are lots of questions for you, many interesting precedents you've just shared with us. So we will continue with the next speaker and then come back at the end.
Thank you.
All right, thank you
for joining, and thank you for inviting in this very interesting platform. So regenerative design. I mean, that's different than sustainable design, although many people think it's the same. But what is interesting, me being a landscape architect, is that landscape is the medium for regulating flows and recycling resources, but also protect or reincorporate landscapes with the basic life support services, such as energy conversion, water treatment, nutrient cycles, etc. The self-renewing systems of energy and materials, so the regrowth of trees, of bamboo, of whatever you name, you will need from nature. And then, of course, ecosystems are the basis to apply technologies and strategies that generate basically these social ecological wholes in a way. And that way we hope to introduce the capacity again and viability and vitality and evolution in our landscapes and systems. Next one, please. Yeah, so we do, of course, ecosystems are the basis then for this. So we, in our urban ecology design, we use ecology a lot. So ecology is everywhere in our education. Next one, please. And here we have a graph of the urban ecology. So basically, urban ecology is then, well, ecology is the living and non-living environment interacting with each other. But in this case, that happens in cities where a lot of people are concentrated. And yeah, a biologist would actually look at this, for instance, at the sunflowers, the four dots, those four red circles, as a food web, where an insect visits a flower, the insect gets eaten by a bird, but that bird in itself gets eaten by, in return, gets eaten by the peregrine falcon in the tower. And then we see behind this gentleman standing there being interviewed the wall, which in the 1950s was created, well, basically to keep the rain out for constructive reasons and many more of these things. But it was never designed to be bioreceptive, so that plants can grow on it, that bees and birds can actually nest in it, let alone the roof on the left-hand side. It was never constructed to be a green roof or a green-blue roof where we actually can store water, let alone the city designers that way. But so it's only in the past 10, maybe 15 years that these things have come into play. Okay, green roofs have been into play longer, but these are new things, and we try to get in our education in our projects. And next one, please. So we test a lot of stuff in projects. Next one. And yeah, of course, one of the bigger issues is the biodiversity and urbanization. I mean, cities cover a large part of planet Earth, but it's especially their footprint which covers a lot of spots. I mean, we also find plastical particles on Mount Everest, but also in the Mariana Trench, in the deepest parts of our oceans. So let's say, yeah, humanity, our systems of living are actually everywhere and influencing biodiversity in a negative way. Next one, please. So at the Biodiversity COP in Colombia 2 months ago, we tried to work with this, let's say, indigenous knowledge and traditional practices for water and biocultural diversity. And we specifically named it landscape-based solutions and not nature-based solutions, because we thought, and of course not excluding it, but nature-based solutions can also be quite far away from local knowledge, from local landscapes, from local quality. So we wanted to get that biocultural, that local aspect in. So that's why we change the term a bit. Next one, please. Yeah, so we can look at regeneration of natural systems, water, local culture. That's what I just mentioned, and basically using ethnobotanical and also ecosystem knowledge of local people. Next one, please. So we know these projects, they're all over internet, like the Lus Plateau in China, which has been regenerated from this landscape on the left to the one on the right. Also, it has a lot to do with maintenance, with keeping the goats out, but a lot of other issues, so that this landscape has become basically reinvigorated and actually can produce the ecosystem services we are looking for. Next one, please. But we see these things all over the planet. We have this choker system in Rajasthan and India, which basically catches the rainwater a bit downhill, but then overflows in the next system, the same like this, into next one and the next one. So basically, yeah, like a sponge landscape, actually catching the water when it goes downhill, but also giving it the opportunity to infiltrate. Next one, please. And of course, this greening Africa with the you must know and are familiar with. But these, in fact, this is all copied from indigenous and local knowledge of greening more arid regions. Next one. And of course, we have that too. In the Netherlands, where I'm from, here in Delft University, we are in a country which is much more wet. So next to the rivers, we have these old girinden, as we call them. So these are willow forests where the branches we can use for how we used to weave before the 1960s, to weave baskets, but also mats, and throw stones on them so that it would sink in the river and we would kind of stabilize the riverbeds. But also these forests in the bottom left, where we can actually combine wetlands with wood production. So let's say each culture has these indigenous knowledge and indigenous practices. And I would like to continue a bit with this one, because it's in this kind of environment where our campus at Delft University is a testing ground for many of these issues. Next one, please. So what we try to do is that we said, well, look, nature inclusive design is of course about it's about bird boxes and bed boxes and bee hotels, and don't forget the bee restaurants, basically the flowers for the bees and the insects. But we thought, well, can we take this a step further? Can we look at system level and then zoom in on master plan? And basically what we did is look at system level. So on the top corner left, we see the city of Delft, the sandy soils in brown. The blue areas are basically the deeper areas. So you see the further south we go, the more wet it becomes. So at system level, so the water system, we say, okay, to actually keep the water more, to store more water in the dry zones so that the wet zones actually don't have so much flooding when it rains too much. And what habitats are related to that? So we link that to forest, meadow, and swamps. Of course, we can have forests in wet and swamp areas as well, but this is what we choose for on this side, linking to local habitats and ecosystems. So we have the system level, the habitat level, and on the right-hand side, the species level connected to that. But we as human beings are also species, so also for us it should be, well, a living environment, otherwise people will not accept it, especially in urban areas or like a campus on this one. Next one, please. So here we have a student who actually looked at the campus, and he said, well, there's 4 species of birds he heard from BirdLife Netherlands, and they said, well, we have water birds, we have birds who like wetlands, birds who like meadows, and birds who like shrubs and forests, and birds who like rocky areas. So all the buildings basically he drew like a rocky landscape. So this is actually our campus with all the buildings in it, but then, well, maybe I cannot check it, but seen through the eyes of a bird. And this is basically a biotope or habitat map, which translates the the ecology and the target species approach to urban development. And this is what we like to work much more with. Next one, please. So then the question was, how do we translate this to a square at our own faculty? So on the left-hand side, we see the square paved all over with a lot of bikes. And next one, please. And we said, can we combine that? Can we say that we have, because there's a heat issue, a heat stress issue, so can we provide more shade with the trees we have there, but at the same time also store more water on the square from the roofs of the buildings? And then many people said, yeah, because we had a set trees, the species we had already been given, so we couldn't change that. So there were some species which don't like wet zones. So they said we cannot do it. So then we said, well, why not change the surface? So why not put the wet trees in the valley and the higher trees we make a hilly landscape? So basically we combined heat stress and water storage in one go. Next one, please. So this is the plan. Here on the bottom left, you see the trees. Some are a bit higher up who like it dry. The trees who are from wetlands, we put in the deeper zones. So this way we could combine the heat stress factor, so the shading factor, and the water storage factor. And we had different layers of shrubs and ground cover and other perennials and things for different biodiversity layers. Next one, please. So basically we try to have synergies in one spot, so water storage and heat stress and biodiversity, and create a good public space in a cultural heritage and research environment. Next one. So 2 months ago we had the opening. We have some fruit trees as well for students and staff, and it's now, well, basically well, it's now into winter, but this was a first step to actually create a bioswale, a swale with trees at the same time. Next one, please. So then we said, well, if we create this bioswale, bioswale in Dutch is a wadi, then we said, well, why not create a bioswale city? A city like a sponge city where we can do this. So all road verges, all parks where we basically create wetlands to store water, because what is happening is that we either have too much water or we have too little. That's happening all over the planet. So we need to have much more storage capacity in our green system. Next one, please. So we also saw that in trees, in tree-lined streets. I mean, this street in Rotterdam is 1 kilometer long, yet only one species of tree. So it's 1 kilometer long. It goes up, it goes down, it goes through sand, through clay, through peat, and yet only one species of tree. And then we said, well, this we can do this different. Some areas were actually quite deep and wet. Next one, please. So instead of having one tree, we said, okay, why not? Yeah, you can click to the next one. Why not have more trees? Like, for instance, 10 species, and not one age, but young trees, old trees, trees who like it dry, who like it wet. So basically create a linear forest, which if it's dry, well, some might die. If it's wet, some might die. But because it's so much diversity, there's young, there's old, seedlings are allowed to grow up as well. This means that the resilience of this tree line, of this linear forest, is much bigger, and it allows for more biodiversity. Next one, please. So here a student actually combined it with some species, like a bat or a hedgehog or some birds and some flies, and linked it to moving behavior, to nesting place, to shelter, to what kind of food do these animals need. Next one, please. And so we came up with kind of design principles to use in the whole design. Next one. So on campus, we also tried to mimic this. So we used this linear forest. The first 25 meters were native species from the Netherlands, but the next 25 meters were actually species from southern France. And why southern France? Because we wanted to test how do birds and insects react to these southern French species and southern France, because that's the climate we are actually expecting within a few decades. It's already happening now. We have more and more summers like this, so that these plants do better than our native plants, like birches and other trees. They're simply dying. Next one, please. And so another one is this one. So that the sandy soils in cities, we link that to dune plantations. So all dune plantations like sandy soils. So that's what we've been planting as well. Next one, we look into bees. 70% of the bees, they don't nest in bee hotels or in trees, but they nest in soil. So if there's no available open soil, then many insects will disappear. And we see these bee burrows here in the landscape. Next one, please. Which is just a hill. But why should it be a hill? Why not have a swale like this little ditch? Take the soil and use the soil as a bee ridge. Or maybe not as a bee ridge, but as an eco ridge, so that we can create new ecological infrastructure which serves insects, which serves wetland species, but also serves people in itself. Next one. Yeah, thank you. So we also made a vision for campus. We asked students to do that. So we have a green village where we test stuff. We have a blue village, which is more wet for wetland construction, for floating buildings, for building on poles. We have a food village where there's an old farm where we link this to, food forests and all these kind of things. We have a botanical or biodiversity village where we try to work with local species and see if we can be working with that. Next one, please. But also, since we are Faculty of Architecture, see how we can, instead of using plastics, using local materials. So let's say in the 1700s, so 300 years ago, in our buildings, we were already using hemp and flax and seagrass and all these local stuff in our built environments. So we want to get rid of this plastic carbon intensive stuff and basically use local materials, but we also want to test that on campus. Next one, please. So this is the farm I talked about. Next one. where we designed the food forest and the gardens around this for students, but also for staff to interact. Next one. Yeah, so next steps is of course to work with sensor technology, drone technology for mapping, and satellite technology. So now we can see it's a forest, but it would also be nice. What type of trees are there? But also gray water for wetlands. How can we work with that? Next one. And of course, these technologies are already out there, but they can be more specific, etc. So in our urban ecology group, we do more than just urban ecology. Yeah, we do architectural ecologies, like on buildings on the left-hand side, but also agroecologies, where we look at peat landscapes, for example, or other farming methods, but also arid urban regions or tropical urban regions or continental climate. So we look at different situations, but basically the approach is always the same. It's always that we look at system level and what is the system, where can we tweak the system, what is the system before and after, what is the habitat for the ecology, but also for people, and what kind of species should we plan or allow to grow. Well, often it's much better to do nothing, just to let go. Next one, please. So jumping from these urban ecologies, we now have students working in the projects in Nakuru in Kenya, where we look at indeed the sponge cities approach. How can we work with that, but not just for the city itself, but also maybe accommodate. How can we work with local stakeholders and see if this city grows from 500,000 people to 2 million? What should be the framework? Next one, please. But also here with this organization, we work together, Africa Wood Grow, which, next one please, which is basically in the Tiba River, which then does this reforestation projects. Next one. And the villages around these, they all like to have these new food forests because they give food to the people or and the materials, but they also store the water and it basically next one please gives new vigor and new energy. This is another one where we did the same thing in Mexico, in Monterrey, also again with local people. Next one. And where we did analysis, water structures, etc. So it's understanding the system, habitat, and species. Yeah, next one. Where we see here, well, the system before and the system after, where we do what are possible interventions in this sponge city approach. Next one. And so this is we work also with common land, which say there's 4 returns in landscape restoration, which is return of inspiration and giving people back hope and sense of purpose, social return and giving people back jobs and education, social connections, but also natural return, so biodiversity, but also make a living, financial return. So we try to work with this. It's often well, it's also hard to do that, and but it's worth the effort. Next one. We also have a free course, a MOOC, a massive open online course. There's the link, but if you go to this website, you can inscribe for this course. It's every half a year it starts, and then you have a lot of lectures and stuff like that if you're interested in that. But we are also happy to get feedback because we learn from all these other cultures and knowledge institutes worldwide. And so, yeah, with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. Next one, I think, is the last one. Yes, thank you very much. And well, see you later at the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nico, for your presentation. Very interesting, and also I think a different perspective looking more at landscape. I think we now have like a broad understanding of the topic. And yes, as you've said, we will come back later for Q&A. And right now we're just going to spend a few seconds setting Rebecca up, who's here with us.
Rebecca, who you can see hopefully in front of your screen. And those of you in the audience as well, the fact that from through the screen, I don't. Rebecca Khamala is a multidisciplinary designer with a background in architecture, an artist and a writer. Her work is centered around her curiosities, which are often driven by a fascination for people, culture, and the environment. Rebecca's practice revolves around working in harmony with the natural environment and exploring local materials and technologies. She researches traditional crafts through collaborating with local artisans and thereafter adapting them in contemporary design. That was a very short introduction to Rebecca. I will hand over to her. Thank you, Randy. Okay. Hi, I'm Rebecca Khamala. I also go by Clara. I'm going to share a bit on regenerative development perspectives and some of my explorations. So regenerative development is an approach to the built environment, to community development that looks at doing more than just mitigating the effects of human activity. It looks at how we as designers, builders, planners, citizens can transform our role to enable the places that we live and work in to thrive. So it is so the concept is grounded in the understanding of the complex and dynamic nature of living systems. So there's a lot of usage of frameworks to help enable systems thinking. But before I share the frameworks, okay, but before I share some of the frameworks, I'll share a few of my explorations. During the pandemic, I briefly worked with a tourism company that was looking to tap into the domestic market, and they had an underdeveloped niche around agritourism. So the proposal was for them to make agriculture fashionable, to have their different network of farms host events and activities like picnics. And the thought of picnics brought baskets to mind. And while I was going back and forth looking at how we can customize some baskets for that, I realized how little I knew about baskets. And it led me down the rabbit hole of exploring traditional craft and their materiality. So here are some of my explorations. This was an installation from my residency at 32 degrees that was looking at weaving for plants and plant fibers, and also exploring an underlying theme of grief. And this is also another installation, Cultivating Rhythms of Care, from the Kla Art Festival that happened August this year, that also looks at how to envelop space differently using fibers. But the main theme was looking at the relationships between the cycles in nature and our own internal rhythm, specifically the menstrual cycle. And this was made in collaboration with Birunji Kawoya. And then finally, this installation, Tulazania Umula, Playlist, which was also made this year, which is going to be our case study, which just explored placemaking in Kampala's public spaces. Okay. So frameworks. Regenerative development looks at shifting our understanding of things, how we think, and therefore how we make too. And some of the core aspects are looking at potential over problems, because problems can just be solved while potential can be realized, and problem solving looks to the past while potential looks into the future. And then we have this idea of place, that every project is nested in place. And to
to have a better understanding of our projects, we need to shift the perspective from place to the context in which the projects are embedded. And then we have role of a function, thinking about things as processes rather than tasks or functions. And then regenerative goals versus goals. Goals tend to be seen as end goals, as endpoints of an activity, while regenerative goals set the table for ongoing development. So here is a tetrad framework that is used to design and assess regenerative projects. Going on to understanding place, because place is very core to the concept of generative development. We need to understand what place is, and the first step to that is learning how a place functions as a living system. Because if we want to make projects that are regenerative, we have to have an understanding of the systems in which they'll be embedded, because it's those systems that will be regenerative. And a rule of thumb is to look at least 3 levels of system. Here we have a framework that looks at a project in its proximate whole and a greater whole. The proximate whole is just the place in which the project is or is going to be, where it is directly influenced and where it can also have direct influence. And the greater whole can be just about anything, a neighborhood, a city, a field of endeavor, just about anything. So we're going to look at this in this project. So this is the place study. This is the place study of the Tulazania Khamala project. To the top right is the proximate whole, the railway gardens, which are interestingly located because there's a park, a truck park in the middle of the gardens that separates them in 2 sides. Then we have the railway station down here, a road that goes to NASA, place where they issue permits, Victoria University to this side, a road leading to Parliament. We have taxis and border staged here going deeper into town and to places like Wandegea. And then we have express taxis going to Entebbe. So there's a lot of activity and a lot of transitioning. So it makes the place interesting. And when we were studying it to find a role for it, for how the project would help it better contribute to its larger whole, which the greater whole was set to be the rest of the other public spaces in Kampala, because the notion is for a project to have impact or to be regenerative, it has to help, or it has to enable its proximate whole to achieve a greater value, to contribute to its larger whole in a new way that it has not been before. So seeing as this place was very transitional, we envisioned it to be like a nursery where we would plant ideas so that they can be transplanted and planted elsewhere to thrive. And we also noted how people express place. There was this little interesting board game station, and we capitalized on that to make what we did. We had a few workshops to engage the users of the space, find out what they did in the space, how they related to it, to help inform how the project could help the space perform in ways that it has not been before, and just as we imagined. Now, the items that we placed there, we envisioned or anticipated them to be moved, and we were looking forward to seeing that movement. But when the movement actually happened, it was a lot grander than we anticipated, because on the fourth day of the exhibition, everything was carried and sold. And when we came and did a little investigation, we were directed to the city abattoir. When my carpenter Douglas and I went, we found these guys playing with the Moisolog, which was interesting because that was the point of the project. And the person who had taken everything and sold them had customized them and put a number for people to call. So it was interesting that the idea of placemaking, or what public spaces would be, was being transplanted elsewhere. And when we were able to collect half of everything and brought them back, and it was interesting to see the new interactions happening, because the space also hosts a lot of police. They also come there to rest like any other person. So it was interesting to see how these objects in space brought together different people in Genzo sitting to have their chai. So it was interesting to see the idea take place. But again, the goal was to not have a finished something. It was to just lay ground for other things to come up, for new creativity and for people to think and develop new things. So it left us with questions on things like security, on things like security and maintenance and repair, where we have to look into our cultures of maintenance and repair, and how projects in the future can help either revive or regenerate this idea of repair. But also, I think I went into the project with a very, in quotes, urbanized thinking to durability, because we tend to want things to not spoil at all, for them to just stay there. But while working with local artisans to even find these materials, it was interesting the local solutions that they found, because the primary inspiration for a lot of the items that were made was the traditional three-legged stool. And traditionally, it was made with rattan, but because rattan has been over-harvested and it's now a scarce breed, they found an alternative, Ziba, which is not as durable as rattan, but it equally has its benefits, because it grows in 3 months, while rattan takes 10 years to grow and 20 to mature. And it was interesting, the solutions that were coming up in these communities versus what was also coming up in the workshops, because there's all these plastic alternatives coming to be the solution to the depletion of this, which led to question, how can we as designers evolve, and what role can we contribute if we thought about these materials as our project, and the craft industry as the proximate whole? How could we help this proximate whole of ours evolve to serve a higher value than it already is? Because eventually these materials are also tied to ecosystems, that are tied to agriculture ecosystems, swamp ecosystems, and perhaps to keep this alive, we have to look into the making of this. So it was interesting to see other solutions to the disappearance of a reed, because they found an artisan who was growing napier grass in the garden specifically to make these different baskets. And napier grass is usually grown to feed cows or used in traditional construction. So it was interesting to see all these local innovations and ideas coming up. But more importantly, to think about the places where these crafts are tied, because when you start to think about, to stop thinking about a basket as a thing and you start to think about it as an alive entity, because it's you start to see the communities of people who made it, but also the ecosystems that provided the materials that made them. And the question all the questions that have started coming up in this circles is how can we leverage our material culture to steward our ecosystems that are under pressure because of urbanization or agriculture, because it was interesting finding a farmland in the world that had palm trees, then sunset palm, but they were cutting them down and burning them for agriculture. So what if we evolved our roles as designers and tapped into the potential of these materials and make them take on a higher form, which is valuable and value adding? What would the interaction between these? What would the interaction in these different ecologies be with these materials? And it was also interesting that the diversity, or like the wealth of biodiversity we have in terms of palm. For example, the rapier palm is different from the Sansa palm, which is also different from this other palm, and they all give off different materials, are used differently in interesting ways. And the question I would leave is, what does this place, which is the craft industry, need for its next phase of evolution, and what can I and my basket, what can I, how do my basket and I need to evolve to help the evolution of these spaces? Thank you.
Now invite Rebecca to come up to it so that we can see you with the other speakers. Okay. Maybe we'll stop sharing, and then David and Nico could also turn on their videos. And you can now, hopefully you can now see both Rebecca and a bit of the audience. Thank you for your presentation, Rebecca. It was interesting to see your experiment and your precedent that actually happened. I think now there's a few people in our audience, so I always open up to you first. I mean, the speakers also, but you're also welcome if you have questions for each other to speak to each other. But if there are people in the audience who would like to in the discussion, you're very welcome. And then if there are also people in the chat, then we can look at those as well.
You're obviously an architect, and I'm really looking, and I'm an architect, and I'm really looking forward to reading your book. Some of the examples that you've shown are quite, I would say, quite high tech in a way. The Google headquarters, some of its buildings, and And there's always part of me that thinks, how much of that regenerative nature of these projects is kind of offset by the amount of energy that went into actually producing these sort of projects. And I don't want to sound like, I do know that there's a real reason for high tech, and I don't want to sound like I'm not excited about them in some way. But what I was wondering, as you did your research and as you collected so many examples, what's your favorite low-tech example of something where you would say a building that gives more than it takes, or a part of a building that gives more than it takes, but low-tech?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a great question, and it's very much on my one of my main things that keeps me awake at night is the idea that we've got to somehow transition to a better built environment, but in that process it's going to use lots of stuff to do that, and there's lots of impacts from all that stuff that we're manufacturing. So I know I completely agree with you, and what I was trying to pick out was a sort of broad range of projects, some that I could see that developers and people that I work with regularly could relate to, as well as the more, like you're saying, the sort of the lower tech solutions. And I think what was really interesting is some of the work that Kerry Architecture have done on with their award-winning school, where they took the actual solutions, the actual materials that were readily used for designing a school, for example, and just reapplied those and raised up the roof away from the I think it was a reed ceiling, and then put a corrugated metal roof above that and made it much wider so that it protected the walls from the sun, and also allowed the hot air to rise out through the ceiling and escape, rather than it becoming a sort of radiator. So I think there's some really simple, clever stuff. I think and the Green School South Africa was, I think in many ways, a low tech solution. Certainly, a lot of the materials were reclaimed. There was at least some use of rammed earth technology, and local materials and local sort of vernacular architecture was used. But they still had photovoltaics and other things there. So I suppose it's really, how purist do we have to be, and how much are we going to have to use some amount of technology to create a regenerative solution? I think the problem, particularly on inner city sites, is there isn't the space to use the nature-based solutions, and land costs or values will inevitably drive us to more high-rise, more intense use of that space. So we're still going to be using higher tech stuff. So I mean, there's a couple of examples there, but I think even the Skoonskip development, which I must find out how to say that properly. Maybe our fellow speaker can help me. But that was relatively low tech in that it used lots of bio-based materials. They did use concrete for the pontoons, but they have developed a concrete that has reclaims cement from other from old concrete now, so they will be using that in the future, and the technology is in the small stuff rather than the bulky stuff. So I suppose that's probably my favorite. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Right. I think maybe I could ask a question. I'm quite curious, and I don't know. I think it was mostly maybe directed at Nico, but Rebecca, David, if you had something to say as well. I'm kind of curious to know more about how the community's reaction and involvement with some of the projects you're doing. So, for example, the one that Nico was showing of in front of the main, I guess, the entrance to the architecture campus or something for that, where they're planting trees and retaining water. I'm curious to know because I'm assuming many of the new projects that, I mean, David has presented many projects that start from scratch and are looking towards being regenerative, but with projects that are already existing, how is the community sort of engaged, and are there challenges with working with people in different contexts?
Yeah, sorry, I cannot share my camera, it seems, but anyway. Yeah, so thank you for your question. Yeah, that is very interesting. At first, I must say the first year, we did this for a few years now. The first year we were not allowed by university to do anything, to take out pavement or whatever. So we basically did some guerrilla gardening and showed what was possible, showed them, look guys, we need to move, we need to change. So that was more the university board, the dean and so on. The second year, they saw the potential and we were given some plots to do some gardens. And the third year, actually, we were asked and so I'm talking about a student team every year of 25 students. And the nice thing about working with students is that, they can draw a nice plan and show what is possible without being, you know what I mean, that it's official yet. So people who are in charge, they can they can see it and get enthusiastic, but they don't have to decide on it yet. So it's a kind of middle ground. So the third year we were actually asked to join the university vision to make that, and then later on we said, well, let's now build this, let's do stuff. So we had students involved and staff to make this happen. Of course, there's always a trade-off between, let's say, how much pavement should there be? Do we reuse the cobblestones which were in the soil from the beginning because of carbon intensity issues, or there's a trade-off with safety regulations, etc. But in general, it took a few years to get people on board. But I must say, students were from the beginning enthusiastic, and well, they paved the way to make this happen. So that was, very nice. Now we can scale up to the whole campus and actually show the board that it's not just a few spots which can be a living lab, but the whole campus can be a living lab, or the whole city in a way. So we just need to, to test things and to dare to try new things. Low tech, high tech, whatever, make things happen. So, and that is what we showed, and students like it a lot, as well as the staff.
Well, for our context, everything is really just trying out new things, but I guess there's a good switch in between the practice of art and architecture, because ideally these things would not be welcomed if it's like I want to make this like in the capacity of all we're architects always, but if you introduce it as public art, the city council is a little more accepting of it, and also the people on the ground are excited about it because it's not coming from the city council. There's like a love-hate relationship there, but it's just interesting that we can have a starting point, because it's really just a start.
Then Dr. Nico Tillie, and thank you for the presentations. He says, I often think that regenerative design requires the community project champions to continue the regenerative process as the project develops and grows over a longer period. So his question is, how do we balance the role of the practitioner with the including the end users and communities, right? I don't direct feel that. Yeah, maybe I think Nico. So the question is, how do we balance the role of the practitioner with that including the end users and communities? I think actually everyone could could respond to this. Everyone touched on it, but how do we balance the role of the practitioner with the including the end users and communities?
Yeah, I think that's probably one for Nico, really. But yeah, I'm not. Clearly, we obviously need to bring those that are occupying the buildings or the landscaping to be part of the process, I suppose. So yeah, I think absolutely we have to balance the two. Yeah, definitely. And I think the whole sort of premise seems to be around regenerative design is to very much integrate things into the place. And rooted in place and the people. I mean, I must admit, I've looked at it much more from an ecosystem perspective than I think a social perspective, just because certainly where a lot of projects I work on, there's a reasonable amount of voice given to local residents and the people that might be occupying the spaces, but actually the ecosystem and nature doesn't have a voice. So I was trying to say that I think what we need to do is give nature a voice, and some of the people are writing about regenerative design and practitioners now are starting to get into a point where they're actually thinking about how do they practically give nature a voice on projects, and almost or actually getting to the point where you actually have a representative in the design team or in the project team who actually is thinking from that perspective. And there's even a case study in Costa Rica where part of the city called part of one of the cities called Sweet City has given the pollinators and the trees and the river citizen status. So it has the same status as the citizens, the human citizens in the suburb. And I thought that was a really clever idea about how you start to completely rethink how we approach design.
Don't know if you had anything to add. Yeah.
I don't think place can. Okay, I don't think the community can exist in isolation of the place. So when you're walking around the place, you have to look at those qualitative elements of it, which are people, and find out how people actually define that place. Because I realized while working a lot of times, you can look at the statistical data of place, yet there's a whole different cultural understanding of what that place is, where the boundaries are. So engaging people in those boundaries helps. Example of that installation is we thought the grounds were one big place that everyone existed in. But after we came back the second time, we found out that the truck people have an organization, and whatever is tent is theirs. Everything else, no one's really. So to even have those things stayed, I would have to engage the leadership of the truck drivers.
My question was a bit of a time previous question in terms of meeting the thinking. It's the needs finding phase of the project. I see that we do a good job. I was just wondering, in the design phases, for example, is that another avenue which you've considered engaging with the community? Say, for example, the guy who left his phone number on the stool, would reaching out to him to say maybe, oh, come see how we make these things, be like something you consider going forward?
I think it's about slowly breaking the barrier, because like there's a lot of trust issues. We moved in that space a couple of times, just observing, and then we went on with a workshop where we just worked a bunch of games and invited people to play. But there's a lot of trust issues, and every time you're there, people are like, what's your actual intention? What do you want to do? Are you here with KCCA? The government is against us. So it's really about changing mindset. But that happens with attempts, like small attempts at a time. But yes, we tried calling that guy. This one used to go through, but he wouldn't pick up. And funny enough, the people there know who took the things. But again, I'm still an outsider, really. Just somebody told us, hey, go check out the Lufra, and we found something. But I guess if we keep going back and we build an after relationship, the results will be different. But if it starts small.
And mine goes to all this because we have looked at the stakeholders being the users or the community and then the design. But then the other big part of which is say, like for your case, the city council or government or any other body that has regulations in place. Have you there to have an interaction and engagement to see that some of these are put, some of the things you want would be incorporated in the laws so that you fast track kind of solutions you want to bring in community. Catch up with, say, the very problems you want to solve that are being caused by urbanization. Because like if you say that, oh, we wait for people to address, but then you see the problems that really growing so fast, and you always just playing catch up.
Right. So it basically you're asking about the local authorities and how do you engage with authorities in their in some of these projects as well, alongside people. But what about the authority?
Yeah, I mean I think that's a theme that I saw coming out of my interviews with some of the designers. Was they were very, very keen to engage with both with sort of planning authorities, but also with other infrastructure bodies and what for example there's a couple of the projects like the there's a Santa Monica building and the PAE living building. Both had to engage with the local water authority to work out and get permits and agreements on using rainwater as drinking water, having cleaned it up, for example, and also sort of negotiating deals with if they're cleaning up their own wastewater, then can they not do a deal with the water authority, because that would mean that they weren't being a burden on the the Water Authority. And the Synergetic development also developed some new legislation, I suppose, around microgrids, and they created an aggregator who would sit between the energy utility company and the residents that would sit in the middle of that and actually act as a sort of broker to distribute energy that was being generated on the site. So I think, yeah, there's all sorts of things that you need to negotiate, and at the moment I think it's all really new and pioneering. There's not very much that I saw anyway when I was talking to people that was already in place, and so it's breaking new ground all the time and trying lots of new things, and then I think what was really important as well was that some projects were actually then writing lessons learned off the back of it and actually sharing that. So Synergetic has got a whole website full of lessons learned that they've shared, with everything from financial arrangements about how they got it working, through to how they funded the project, through to negotiating their biodigester and whether they could use that as well, floating biodigester. So yeah, there's I think you're right. There's lots to do. I mean, it seems that planning authorities certainly would I think in principle would embrace a lot of this, these ideas. So yeah, I think that would work, but I think, yeah, there's lots of existing legislation that would also get in the way of it. You have to then work your way through all round.
Yeah. We reached out to Ecocity, and they were very embracing of the idea, but we only found out like 2 days to the installation that KCCA didn't have authority over the place, and it was somebody else. But I guess for our context, it's quite, things are quite blurry and messed up. But I think the city's biggest concern, at least for the time that we were interacting with them, was so like how do you think this is going to stick if everything that the city tries to put up is vandalized? So I think that bigger problems, but about the part of always playing catch up, I believe if a number of us keep trying and like talking, going outside the boundaries, trying new things, I think we can make an impact.
The side question, I'm just for her to get clear what I was asking, that in this case, your situation, you're always like going to KCCA to get approval, and then maybe they'll send you somebody else. Have you tried to find out who is at the top, so that instead of always finding yourself to play within the laws, you're actually contributing to the laws, which will help your work easier from down below? That okay, you have to look back. What is the origin of the space where you're trying to put this installation? For instance, the parking lot used by the trucks may have been parking for the cars. What were the original restrictions of this space? So then you go back and then interact at that level, and then whatever was in place at first protects you, what you want to put, and any other thing that we're talking about as regenerative design to easily come, rather than us finding trouble to even start because of what is existing.
Yeah, maybe we'll take the other question as well, and then see if we can answer. Thank you very much. My name is Nico. I'm a graduate architect. Probably two questions on it, and I'm glad you asked for me. Before we actually arrive at the policy level, what advice would you give to China who would like to apply these regenerative design principles in a context where traditional design practices and technologies are revealed? So, given the fact that in some of our trainings, there was more emphasis on these traditional design and technical practices, what advice would you give us to sort of beef up our knowledge? Because yes, we'll be able to read the articles, we'll be able to attend these talks, but at the end of the day, if you're to convince someone, maybe let me say a traditional designer or an existing client, you have to show prowess in like the technical understanding. For instance, I saw the amazing project where urine was being translated into water, or waste was being translated into water. What course of action would you advise that designer to take? So they're a bit of a question. I hope you got that. Thank you. Okay, do you have an immediate response? I don't have to either one. Yeah, to the regulations and the design as well. I think in our context, when it comes to regulations, it's about who has the power. Because even if even engaging with KCCA would not like engaging on a low level, but KCCA didn't have like a authority over the place. So even when we had a stamp or whatever, it didn't mean anything. It was the rich guy who put the space who had the power. So I guess it's about looking at how to motivate different stakeholders with the power and influence to come on board, rather than just looking at the law or policies. Because I don't think, especially in our context, I don't think that's how policy influence families.
I think on terms of what to learn next, I think I say for me, I think there was that sort of couple of insights I gained from the research I did around working out what that natural systems are so absolutely crucial to our continued existence, that learning about those a bit more, I think, has been really interesting from my perspective. So understanding natural systems and processes, I think there's quite a lot of work and research just available on the internet around ecosystem services, and that researcher I mentioned called Maybright Pedersen-Zari has written lots of papers that are freely available that around how you apply those to buildings. So I think that's a really interesting little bit of research to do. And I think what I've seen a lot is, that's why I think it's really interesting seeing Nico and seeing what was him talking about combining the landscaping with ecology, because there are some landscape designers who are more sort of, let's design it all concrete and square trees kind of thing. But I think the sort of work that Nico's doing around actually looking at nature-based solutions and using natural infrastructure to give us, or at least mimicking it, is a very powerful way to start to move more regenerative approach. I think that's important. So yeah, I certainly would want to learn more about ecology, learn more about ecosystem services and those sorts of things. And when I'm working currently on lots of projects, you know, the ecologists there might be ecologists there, but they have a bit of a walk-on part. You know, they just come in and colour in a few bits of green around the place, and then that's the only chance they get. Whereas actually, if we're driving the whole project from that perspective, I think we'd get a very different view on it.
Yeah, I think I think we will, because we're wrapping up, we have about 10, little over 10 minutes. I think we'll close the event now. I just wanted to thank everyone. I think if the follow-up questions, we can maybe carry on after the session. We can send them out in our newsletter. But thank you, David. Thank you, Rebecca and Nico. I think Nico has maybe left. Something might be wrong with his network. I'm not sure, but thank you for joining us and sharing your findings with us. We've had, I think, a really broad perspective on the topic. I think regenerative design is something that maybe, as I think local access the practice, we're trying to really do and make it part of everything we do. And I think we're looking forward to having more discussions. We're engaging with a few people next year to have follow-up conversation and topics on this within this specific area, and maybe actually do something practical workshop. We're not sure yet, but I think it would be great to keep going. And I think, and going back to the question about regulation, I think there are many things that we can do that are not prohibited, and materials we can use, and techniques we can try without being stopped. So in the meantime, we might as well try to do what we can while we wait for the multi-category. But yeah, thank you everyone. And the next event will be in March in the new year. So you're all welcome as usual. And we hope to see you there. And this has been recorded.